Welcome to the podcast, The Unselfish Purpose of Life. Over 15 years ago, I started at a radio station with a monthly show on the purpose and value of unfolding the full potential of life. The discussion centered around the most basic value of life, which is consciousness, and the many angles and disciplines to understand its value in active, daily, responsible life. Consciousness is the basis for our perception of the world. It comprises levels of wakefulness and awareness, and that's a very brief definition of consciousness. We will be examining it more as we move along in future podcasts, and basically it's the foundation for every podcast. We'll have some point about the importance of unfolding more of our inner potential, more of our inner awareness, and that's consciousness, since it is the main point of the podcast. So the podcast also emphasizes that there are two modes of life. There's rest, there's activity. Or we can go to another level of this and say inner and outer. One supports the other. The outer we know very well. You can Google anything. You'll get pages of information. It's the inner that we want to know better. So many of the radio shows I did, the station translated those into podcasts. And but they're on the station's website. And since podcasts are more popular today, I decided to do a little editing here and there, updating and different placement for greater exposure. Now, that radio station is pretty unique, by the way. It's not public and it's not commercial, but it's listener supported. So they can play, and they do play, the most interesting music and have a few inspiring talk shows. And that's why I had one. And if you want to find it, it's streaming online. It's WPKN.org. Today, the topic is change. My name is Kathy Connor. I have been exploring the field of human potential for more than 50 years. I am a certified teacher of the Transcendental Meditation Program, and I teach this specific and very special technique in the public. And in this podcast entitled Change Gonna Come, I discuss the nature of change and the importance of change when society needs, deserves another level of life. Now, I got the title of the podcast from the song Change Gonna Come, the 1964 song by Sam Cooke. It became an anthem during the civil rights movement. And he sings, "It's been a long time coming, but I know." And he said, oh, change gonna come. Oh, yes, it will. And yes, it will, because like it or not, change is the nature of the outer world. It's called the relative. The relative or material world, we might call it, is the ever-changing world that we all know. Change happens, but we look for stability in the outer. But things change there. So there are many examples. My hair color changed. Well, I could change it back if I wanted to. There are some wonderful things to experience, but they don't last forever. I saw the best movie, and I told all my friends about it, but it's over. Well, I can go watch it again, but it'll be over again. And maybe I had the best ice cream. Well, it's gone, and I can have more. But should I really, Change is the nature of the outer aspect of life, yet we seek stability, we seek inner peace and happiness. So where can we find that? We are going to talk about that. So to encourage change, because we often see the need, and we might gather as groups to demonstrate the need for change. One way this has been done is with marches and protests that take place, fueled by people feeling discontent and a desire to make change in the current climate. There have been marches for social and political issues for decades, probably much longer than that. The suffragettes marched. Remember the sit-ins in the 60s, unless you weren't born yet, but maybe you read about it in the history class. There have been marches since then, civil rights marches, Million Man, Million Women marches, and most recent, No Kings. Millions have marched, and many with really creative signs. I think that's my favorite part. And they hope they are noticed for their numbers and perseverance and that change is going to happen. Change is going to come because change is the nature of life. This is the flow of evolution. We're moving forward for a greater and more harmonious experience. And when we don't see that, when we feel stuck, when we don't experience that, we do something about it, and we turn back in that direction, the direction of harmony and evolutionary principles, progress and prosperity. Life moves. As it moves, life changes. Every day is new. Cells replace in our bodies. The villi in the intestines have the highest turnover, replacing every 2 or 3 days. Red blood cells that carry oxygen to the tissues wear out about every 4 months, but they are constantly being replaced due to potential blood loss. The cells of the epidermis, the surface layer of the skin, are renewed every 2 to 4 weeks. Our taste buds change every 10 to 14 days. We see things differently today than we did yesterday, or last year, or last decade. This is evolution. Evolution moves us in the direction of greater knowledge and greater experience. The people marching, they're there in solidarity. They have a unified purpose, unity. And it's not confined to one specific boundary, for example. Many of these marches take place at the same time around the world. We saw that recently. There's an expression from the Vedic tradition, the tradition where the Transcendental Meditation Program originates. And that saying is, "The world is my family." So as a society, we want to move forward with harmony and unity of purpose. We just don't want it for ourselves. We want it for our communities. We want it for our nation. We want it for our world. And we can be an instrument of change in the direction of best possible life for everyone. Is there another way we can make this change without having to go anywhere? Well, maybe you have to go somewhere, but let's see. I'm going to just shift a little bit here because when I originally did this podcast, it was Black History Month, and I spent a little time talking about a particular author that I came to know. I became aware of the book called Tears We Cannot Stop, A Sermon to White America. And I saw him being interviewed on a talk show some years ago, and his name is Michael Eric Dyson. He's a university professor of sociology, Georgetown University, and author of numerous books, many of them New York Times bestsellers. So he's talking about the problem of racism in this country, and very early on in the book, I'm going to read you a paragraph that he wrote. There is a long tradition of a kind of sermon, or what some call the Jeremiad, an extended lamentation about the woes we face, about the woes we embody, a mournful catalog of complaint, the blues on page or stage. Henry David Thoreau was a friend to the form, so was Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Instead of blasting the nation from outside the parameters of its moral vision, the Jeremiad, named after the biblical prophet Jeremiah, comes calling from within. It calls us to reclaim our most glorious features from the past. It calls us to relinquish our hold on, really, to set ourselves free from the dissembling incarnations of our faith, our country, and democracy itself that thwart the vision that set us on our way. Well, I really found that very profound because he's saying we don't have to go over the problems. We can look to the future with a more optimistic view. And he says, what jumped out at me was, comes calling from within. And that's the essence of the solution. And this is what I'm going to discuss. So we're not going to examine problems on the level of the problem, but we're going to look at the common ground. And I want these podcasts to explain a field of life that is beyond the boundaries where problems don't exist. It is consciousness, but pure consciousness. Consciousness in its deepest value, the most essential part of who we are. We all have the potential to experience that level of life. So this is our common meeting ground. And all we have to do is locate it, but encourage it and live it. Frustrations, anger, bad choices, generations old ill behaviors and habits. They all live in the tight boundaries that are not nourished by the peacefulness of the inner value of the mind if it remains unavailable. It's possible to go beyond the rigid, tight boundaries to experience the finer, expansive levels of the mind. And you probably have experienced that if you've had an aha moment or a creative burst or an intuitive experience. So we don't want to waste time swimming on the surface. That doesn't change too much. It just kind of moves things around. For significant change, we really want a new direction, and that direction is inward, from within. We've done as much as we can on the outside. Well, maybe there's more to do there, but it hasn't really done as much change as we'd like in the positive direction. Now, there's a change for many just to go inward, but it's not uncommon anymore for a person to seek their own personal change by looking within. So what happens when we do that? The long habit of the mind is to function on the active levels, but there is a more expanded, more settled level, yet we can even say naturally silent, quietly awake level that is deeply peaceful, that oftentimes we might have a glimpse of in our lifetime. But the further away from that experience, the less we're exposed to it, the less peaceful life can be. The more familiar we are with this experience, the more effective are our actions. The finer levels of life are more expansive. They're not so restrictive as the more active levels. This is not an unusual concept today. We live in an age of wireless communication. When I was growing up, the telephone was hooked onto the wall. You couldn't take it too far unless you had a really long cord. Connecting us all at the touch of a button. So this idea shouldn't sound like a sci-fi movie. Nature is orderly and harmonious. Orderly, a click or two, and you can reach anyone. Out of the billions of people on the planet, you're going to reach one specific person. So it's possible to experience that level of order and enjoy the growth of harmony in your own life, resulting in harmonious behaviors for real change for the individual and society. Evolutionary change from less order to greater order. We are more giving, kind, tolerant, loving, and remember, we are connected. This effect becomes more noticeable in the outer life of society. Real contentment is stable, but all the time. It is the only unchanging part of life, and it's not the relative anymore. There is another layer of life now that's been exposed, and this is called the absolute. Its characteristic is non-changing. So there are two values of life, inner and outer, yes. Change for the outer, non-change for the inner. That's the basis for the change. As mentioned, the nature of our outer life is change. It happens all the time. Where is the most stable level of contentment then? The ice cream's gone. The show I binged watched is over. So where's my happiness now? Does it only come from the outside and on occasion? But real contentment comes from the experience of that peaceful, less active level of the mind that you can't create, by the way. For one main point is create is a verb, and that means activity, and we're moving in the other direction. So we don't want to go that way. It's located in the deepest part of the mind, in what we call transcendental consciousness. Really, the depth is pure consciousness. This refined state of mind depends on the conscious mind being able to access the peaceful state of the mind, found at more refined levels of the mind. Bring the mind to that peaceful state. Be familiar with that and come out. You bring some of that quality with you over time, a lot more, and that becomes evident in the outer. That is real change, an experience and not an attitude. You're not telling yourself to be peaceful when your palms are sweating and your stomach hurts. Stable and not a hit or miss experience. A strong mind infused with pure consciousness is tolerant of the differences of the outer world, understanding the connection of them, by the way. A weaker mind is easily overcome by the surroundings. Whatever a person's state of mind, it's on that platform that one evaluates the environment, the circumstances surrounding him and her. If we want to improve our behaviors, our perceptions, our reactions, we want change, we can look inward to encourage the expansion of consciousness. So we would like the outer world to reflect the qualities of the deep inner. So there's a saying, trying to solve a problem on the level of the problem doesn't really solve the problem. Solving a problem on the level of the problem is like moving the pieces around, but the problem continues. Managing a problem, maybe we have to do it, but there's a difference between managing and eliminating. So which one do we really want? In order to navigate change, we need to be stable, settled, and secure from within. We want an anchor for the boat if it's on turbulent waters. Peace is permanent on the basis of unshakable satisfaction, which is happiness. And at the depth of the mind where consciousness is in its purest state, where maximum order is experienced, there is maximum happiness. Happiness of a greater order called bliss. Maybe we're not yet familiar with it, maybe we've had a glimpse of it, but that means it's there. This experience can be described as a place where the heart rests in the eternal contentment, and the mind is filled with the unity of life, where there is no trace of duality, difference, and therefore peace is abiding. Is that possible? Well, I'm going to quote Mr. Sam Cooke, "Oh, yes, it is." This is the real and true purpose of meditation. It's not to feel good for a few minutes, to contact and integrate the experience of the depth of the mind into daily life for a fuller experience. The Transcendental Meditation technique allows the mind to experience this deep state because it is a deep meditation. It's not a meditation to manage on the surface or feel good for a few minutes. The experience of this state, when regularly accessed, so it's not an overnight miracle, when regularly accessed, begins to be maintained in the outer over time. And when it becomes more evident, more full, then you recognize, oh, I feel better, I'm more clear, I didn't get as upset, I'm more patient. I describe it as deep peace on the one hand and everything else on the other. Life is going to continue. You'll still get stuck in traffic. But this experience is actually very practical. Are you banging on the steering wheel when you're stuck in traffic and late for the important appointment? Or are you not happy, but you're not angry, and you're going to get there when you get there? Which experience causes more stress on your physiology and breaks it down faster? Well, you can't fake it. Your body knows. It's got to be real. If we're moving forward and changing towards higher levels of our own potential, then peace, and we can use other words too, like clarity, evenness, equanimity, patience, empathy, compassion, it becomes a part of our daily life. And if it's not, then the outer world can become quite dark and filled with narrow boundaries, rigid, dark, and harmful to others. In other words, these are two opposite things. We've talked about connection. I mentioned quantum entanglement in an earlier podcast, but I'm going to mention it again because I like it. Quantum entanglement is a quality of quantum physics and describes that multiple particles are linked together in a way such that the measurement of one particle's quantum state determines the quantum state of the other particles. This connection isn't depending on the location of the particles in space, since they can be separated by light years, millions of miles. But what happens to one particle will induce a change in the other. Science is really amazed by this. I think it's so cool. But there is a connection, there's a communication between the particles. So can we understand how this effect would work in society to improve life, make significant change in the evolutionary direction? Well, okay, once again from Mr. Cooke, oh yes we can. When the inner values of life are lived and the outer life is not fraught with frustrations, then life is lived in harmony. This is peace. Inner peace is not an experience to talk about, have a good story. It's lived if we are truly connected. Even a few encouraging harmony from within will affect society, the other particles. With regular exposure to the orderly state that we were calling transcendental consciousness, its deepest value is pure consciousness. We can also look at it in terms of the brain, which I did a podcast on, a brain-based approach to peace. The mind becomes familiar and integrated with that orderliness and with time becomes a normal part of one's brain functioning. So those are alpha brain waves, increased brain coherence. That means the experience of order and harmony is part of your physiology. It's there when you're in traffic, when you're at work, when the kids are jumping around, acting out. It's there. Better brain functioning, orderly parts harmonizing with the whole. Effects of an orderly brain are better decisions, greater capacity to perceive and appreciate, which is ultimately called love. How the physiology responds to an incident is the stress of it. If the physiology is weak, then stress can be overwhelming. If the physiology is flexible, rested, and resilient, stress, which still is going to happen, will not have the same damaging impact. So, science has established that finer values of the objective environment are actually energy fields. The same is true of the mind. The mind body has its basis as a field, the finer field of consciousness in its more refined value or pure consciousness, more sublime level of consciousness. And this is a field of peacefulness, of that deep level of happiness we call bliss. Science talks about energy fields, quantum field theory. The basic reality of both, the subjective and objective, is that there are layers of life. And that means there's active, less active, least active. Nature is nature. You can look out or you can look in. Nature has the same structure. Its lack of connection to these finer fields of the mind, because that is not how we were trained, not in our culture, and that creates problems, narrowness of thinking, lack of peace for both inner and outer, but more connection, more peace that improves the quality of life. So we're going to take a look at outer peace and how we can change society to reflect more of its orderly qualities. So it's possible to generate peace, continuing to look at the problem of peace on the level of the problem, which we talked about earlier, not such a great idea. Well, we've seen in our history, it's not been so effective. History has indicated that to us since the United Nations was formed, for example, in 1945 to prevent war. There have probably been close to 200 significant conflicts and war on Earth since then. There are a few going on now in 2026. Another angle is needed, as I mentioned earlier, and if we think that how can having a more integrated, full functioning mind affect peace in the environment, not that hard to explain, really. There is a new theoretical understanding that concludes that the only practical way to handle large-scale problems like world peace is to approach them holistically by creating coherence in collective consciousness. Collective consciousness is the collective influence of the consciousness of individuals comprising the group of family, neighborhood, city, society. Stressed individuals create an atmosphere of stress in the collective consciousness, and that affects the field. I did some air quotes around that word. We are emitting an influence into the field with whatever we do. So let it be harmony. Simple examples we all relate to. We've all come upon places where we feel funny when we go in there. We're like, I don't feel so great here. Maybe not safe. Maybe we've come upon places where, oh man, this feels so good here. That's an influence in the collective consciousness created by the individuals, not by the buildings. We're all contributing to collective consciousness. Is the energy there orderly or is it stressed? But it's like making a stew. Does it taste good? Is it right? Or is it a little too salty? Maybe too bitter? What causes problems in society, basically, is mounting societal stress, acute political, ethnic, and religious tensions among different factions and critical hotspots throughout the world or in our own country and neighborhoods and our own world, meaning individual life, family maybe. We're all contributing to this. If these tensions continue to grow unchecked, nothing's done about it, then they'll reach a boiling point. Then they inevitably erupt in social violence, which we can call crime, war, terrorism, anything we don't want. We put that on the do not want list. If we can diffuse these societal tensions before they erupt, then they don't break out into social violence. Collective consciousness is a term that means the sum total of all the individuals making up that field, that area. Stressed individuals create stressed society, a stressed collective consciousness. And that includes narrowness of thinking, not full brain functioning. So that also equates to bad decisions. Everyone embedded within that stressed society feels this societal stress, whether they are as stressed or not. The umbrella is there. They're going to be under it. It therefore feeds upon itself, and it continues to grow like a cancer. Conventional approaches to conflict resolution are simply too superficial. They may work for a while, and we're happy for them, but they may just mask the symptoms. But if they're not addressing the underlying root cause of war, terrorism, mounting political, religious, ethnic tensions in society, and for crime, the same happens, mounting stress, you're not going to go in and tell people to think differently. You can say to the person who wants to go rob the bank, you shouldn't do it. And he's thinking, yeah, I got bills to pay. Get out of my way, lady. You didn't change his thinking. History shows that political settlements, negotiated treaties, they're not as effective in stopping how someone thinks and behaves. They don't address and diffuse the deep-seated tensions. In some cases, they can even make it worse if the people are feeling repressed. We all know what happens in the Middle East. So there alone, there have been literally hundreds of peace treaties that have lasted, on average, a few months. Negotiated settlements by representatives of government do not directly address the deep-seated stress in the collective consciousness of the masses, the root cause of the problem. We're seeing it now. We're seeing it today. If people's lives remain the same, fraught with frustration and narrow, rigid thinking, one of the signs of stress, then nothing changes, or more accurately, because change happens, but it will happen more slowly. When we don't want to stay on that level of suffering, we want to move it quickly. Even military approaches, despite their enormous cost and toll in terms of human life and suffering, have rarely achieved a lasting peace. Even the threat of it, military interventions typically only further inflame tensions. We're seeing that now. This is May 2026, so if you're listening to this years from now, just check your history book, what's happened now. We need something innovative, not invasive, something that addresses and diffuses the root cause of violence. Our thoughts, words, actions, they all have an effect. If someone's peaceful, truly peaceful, that influence permeates the environment. And on the other hand, we don't have to go into it, but that influence is there too. To reduce or remove the problems in society, we want to increase orderliness, coherence in the collective consciousness, in order to generate this influence in the atmosphere. If it's tilted one way, we can tilt it the other way. Even if the history books have not shown us this other way, it's there. It's existed for thousands of years. Today, there have been more than 50 demonstrations and 23 scientific studies published in leading peer-reviewed scientific journals on this very point, that the collective consciousness can be changed. There have been at least 7 interventions in the Middle East since the early 1980s, each time reducing war deaths and war-related injuries by an average of 80% and bringing significant progress towards peace among the rival factions. The problem is, these technologies, they haven't been able to be consistent enough to create real, lasting change. So how can this happen? And if this is so profound, why aren't we employing it? Well, how it happens, there are general principles of physics that reveal that the coherent elements of a system exert an influence proportional to their numbers squared. I'm going to say that again. General principles of physics reveal that the coherent elements of a system exert an influence proportional to their number squared. So what does that mean? It means that we can use this technology that physics has identified in human life. The founder of the TM technique, Maharishi Mahesh Yogi, he predicted decades ago that 1% of the population creating strong coherence, remember brain orderliness, or as few as the square root of 1%, practicing a more advanced, extended technique called the TM-Siddhi program. Siddhi is spelled S-I-D-H-I. It's derived from the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali. It would be enough to create an influence of coherence in the collective consciousness capable of neutralizing stresses that are at the root cause of societal problems. Now, this is called the Maharishi effect, due to Maharishi's predictions. It refers to the growth of harmony in society resulting from the growth of coherence experienced by a small fraction of the population. Now, next question, why aren't we doing this? Well, we kind of are, but truly understanding this principle, governments would rush to create these groups. But waiting for that kind of intelligence today from government, I don't want to be rude, but to understand this principle, it's just taking them too long. So we're just doing it ourselves. There are many countries around the world who have established these kinds of coherence creating groups, but it's necessary to have the correct number consistently. And that's been the issue. So these days, 2026, we've been doing this for a long time, but particularly now, it's really showing some growth. We have been putting focus on a handful of places around the world where it's more likely to gather these large numbers, because the square root of 1% of the world's population is just shy of 10,000 people. Now, that's a lot, but there are some countries where this principle is more easily understood, and we're working towards establishing these groups as we speak. Now, there's another principle I want to share with you that comes from science, and it's part of our discussion. We really want to start to understand how nature can explain this. Okay, so we're going to talk about magnetism for a minute. When a magnet comes in the vicinity of a conducting wire at room temperature, magnetic induction occurs, penetrating and disrupting the electrical field. But in a superconductor, the electrical current continues to flow unimpeded without resistance. Superconductivity is the ability of certain materials to conduct electric current with practically zero resistance. This produces interesting and potentially useful effects. For a material to behave as a superconductor, however, very low temperatures are required. Now we're going to compare low temperatures with high orderliness. Now, when a magnetic field is brought near the superconductor, the electrons around the periphery effortlessly, automatically, and collectively change their spin direction to repel the magnetic field. The internal system remains highly orderly, essentially impenetrable. Now, this phenomenon is known as the Meissner effect. Meissner was the scientist who discovered this phenomenon. Now, essentially, the Meissner effect explains the ability of a superconductor to spontaneously repel any disruptive influences due to the coherent functioning of its atomic constituents. Now, this isn't a science class, but I just want to make the point that nature is nature. I said that earlier. And we can use these principles in human life. Coherent national consciousness can be created by people generating enough coherence that will repel disruptive influences if we have the square root of 1% of that country's population in these groups producing this kind of coherence. Human consciousness has the ability to create the same effect of coherence in the collective consciousness. People can be superconductors. Low temperature in this case equates with high orderly brain functioning. Nature is nature. We can see from science how when orderliness dominates, negativity is repelled. Human consciousness is nature. When the influence of coherence generated by this technology reaches a sufficient intensity and an integrated national consciousness is created, the result is a kind of armor of resistance to negativity from the outside. The integrated state of national consciousness created by the Maharishi effect produces the Meissner effect for the nation, for the city, or a family, repelling external disorder. We'll call it keeping the peace. So a new approach is needed. We are moving along in technology. Let's now explore this kind of technology. A new approach is needed, and I want to say urgently needed. Why wouldn't this make sense? All the great ideas that moved life forward, they weren't readily accepted. We get that. That's why we're doing this by ourselves, because the collective consciousness was locked into one way of thinking. But every time we take a leap to a higher level, there just needs to be a front line who sees it and begins to employ it, despite what the general population thinks. What happened to Galileo when he explained that the Earth was not the center of the solar system? Anybody know? Well, he went to jail, and some of his colleagues actually were killed. Well, I hope that doesn't happen, but he prevailed. He did okay. So someone has to be the person to talk about that. We've been talking about this. Maharishi talked about it for decades now. We have to change the trends of time, where anything can happen anywhere and anything can become a weapon of mass destruction if there's enough negativity. This whole idea of freedom, peace, and the way to establishment has been long lost, and it's been easy to dismiss. It's easy to overlook and focus on what's going on in front of us. But we already know that what we're doing is not working. Our sophisticated weaponry is no match for a deeply committed terrorist with an agenda. So this kind of technology hasn't produced peace. We're in an age where we are understanding more deeply, more clearly, the power of the subtle field of nature. Smaller things do more and more powerful things. The finer fields of the mind are capable of more and more powerful harmony. When the destructive forces come to the forefront, why shouldn't peace-loving people come together and intensify peace to that extent that the destructive forces are diminished in its light? Marches are good, they're inspiring. They show how many are eager for peace and order, but more is needed. When the light comes in, immediately the darkness is relieved. We don't need to discuss the darkness. Just bring in the light and change happens. Hundreds of thousands of people marched. What if they all sat down, experienced that deep state of pure consciousness in that large number? The practice and experience of yoga, this is where the Transcendental Meditation program comes from, this particular branch of the Vedic knowledge. It explains how to create peace, by the way. The understanding and experience of yoga comes from the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, text of the Vedic literature, and the source of one of these advanced technologies that we use today, the TM Siddhi program, to generate coherence in the collective consciousness. The Yoga Sutras say, in the vicinity of yoga, hostile tendencies are eliminated. Now, yoga equates with uniting mind-body, orderliness, and harmony. In simpler terms, a few lighted lamps can remove the darkness. Be a lighted lamp to change the world for all mankind, because change gonna come. Thank you for listening.